Hello, my name is Diane, and this is my sub-channel where I post the course assignments I made for my game design classes. In this video, I would like to do a let's play for the horror JRPG The Witch's House. I have already recorded the entire playthrough on my Mac, but OBS on Mac was not recording my voice. It just has to be jerked to me right before this is due. So now this video is going to be just me re-recording the basic points I went through separately and then combining the recording and my playthrough footage through the power of post-editing. So let's begin. The Witch's House is a very classic horror JRPG released freely in 2012. It was extremely well received and praised as one of the best 4 horror JRPGs of all time, and has powered and inspired a whole subgenre of horror JRPGs during that time period. It was then re-released on Steam a few years after, and this is the version I'm going to play. It's the re-release on Steam, and it has an updated new ending and some updated visuals as well. The first thing I would like to discuss is the Western Gothic horror setting in the context of Japanese RPG horror games. As you can see, even though the game is made by Japanese indie developers, we play as a blonde Caucasian teenage girl waking up in the field of red roses, going into a giant Western castle-looking house, a mansion. And our save point is embodied with the black cat, who was then revealed to be a Western demon. As you can tell, the story is very gothic, very Western, and a little bit medieval as well. In the game, we're going to navigate through this Western house while avoiding being killed by the house, which is very similar to the quest in Sweet Home. This is an interesting and very common motif seen in similar free JRPGs released in that time period. So as I mentioned, there are 4 free horror JRPGs that are considered most important. There's Mad Father, Ib, The Witch's House, and Yume Ikki. With the only exceptions of Yume Ikki, which is entirely introspective and does not happen in real-life setting. All of the 3 other games happen in very similar Western architectures. The Mad Father happens in a Western mansion of a mad scientist, and Ib happens in a modern Western art gallery of the deceased European artist. This motif provides different tropes that deviate from Japanese horror tropes as well as the Gothic horror tropes. So it is kind of like this marriage of both Japanese horror tropes and Gothic horror tropes, and doesn't really follow through on either. I would like to say that The Witch's House is a perfect embodiment of that. So in one of our class readings, I believe it was called Chris' Guide to Understanding Japanese Horror, Chris explains that the old Japanese folklores, Shinto and Buddhism are the 3 elements that constructed the convention of the Japanese horror plot. This Japanese game, though, I would like to say they are a kind of Occidental perspective that is not really conforming to Chris's analysis. So Occidental is the counterpart word for the word Oriental. I would like to explain this a little bit more. Japanese horror indie game creators often utilizes this sort of Western Gothic horror form through a re-announced Eastern lens. For the Japanese players, which are the assumed audience for this type of horror games, the games often tell very distant stories from distant European countries and distant medieval times. And in the Japanese cultural context, Western Gothic horror elements are much less about horror and more changed into a symbol of exoticism. That is what I mean by Occidental lens. For this game, The Witch's House, the setting itself, the dusty, dry mansion and dark lighting and everything, they are not what are horrifying in the game. The more direct horrifying element were the instant kills, the yulei or lei looking shadows looming in this environment. These horror designs might look very conventionally Japanese, but the narrative actually provides a plot twist explaining what those are. They were very scary as they look like lei, but they are actually not lei or the shadows of people's owning or anything that falls within the Japanese horror spectrums. They're actually witchcraft. They are Western magic, and these haunting shadows were actually helping the player character to escape. So the horrifying element disappears as soon as it was revealed it was actually Western magic. And I would like to say that scary effect was achieved through Japanese horror convention, but was disenchanted and dehorrified by the Western Gothic element. This is very interesting, but I would like to say it is not really what made The Witch's House the most talked about horror JRPG in Eastern Asian countries. The real horror of the game is more of an unnerving kind of horror than a shocking one. It is tied in more with cosmic horror motive instead of the gothic horror motive. Okay, now I have reached to the end game, and I will explain the most iconic plot twist in JRPG horror games that deeply unnerved so many players. Most of the player on their first playthrough, without the hint, they get the normal ending. The witch living in the house, whose name is Ellen, for some reason is missing her entire lower body and eyes and crawling and chasing after the player character Viola, the blonde teenage girl. As Viola escapes using her smarts and strengths, she managed to reach the edge of the forest and stalling for just enough time for her loving father, a hunter, to kill the witch off with a shotgun. Then the two father and daughter return home together and live peacefully and happily ever after. But if the player find the knife here, this key item here, the truth reveals in the real ending. The player character with Viola's body and face and name and everything is actually possessed by the witch Ellen's soul. The original Viola developed a friendship with the witch who was sick and laid in bed all day. So Viola felt bad for her and agreed to trade bodies with her for a day so she could enjoy a day of joyous life. But the wicked witch was never going to give her body back. She cut up her own lower body, dug her own eyes out, and burnt up her vocal cords before trading bodies. And once the switch happened, Viola's soul was trapped inside her dying, bleeding body and unable to speak, to see, or to fight back, and was left there to die. The player was helping Ellen to escape with Viola's body, and they were helping Ellen to achieve her horrible scheme all along. We were controlling the real witch. Since the player character did not have any conversation, dialogue, or anything that would give her real identity away, the player would only realize this till the very end. And this is a very beautiful kind of plot twist playing around with the idea of silent protagonist. If the protagonist stays silent, you really don't know who this person is. That's the only way how this kind of plot twist would work. The witch chasing after us was the real Viola, the poor, kind, and innocent soul tormented by her friend's betrayal. And in the end, the witch slashes Viola with the knife we retrieved from the drawer, and she slashes her to make sure Viola dies in Ellen's body, and then the hunter dad arrives and shot her to death despite her crying for help. So this is the true horror story. It's a horror story not for the player character who's trying to escape, but for the in-game monster who's trying to chase her, and people who try to protect the girl who's trying to escape, namely the player and the dad. We have no clue that the girl we are helping out is actually the real horrific monster, and the monster chasing after her is our actual everted loved one. In cosmic horrors, the identity eversion between human and monster is a very common motif, and the witch's house provides a whole new perspective from the protector's point of view. We want to help the victim, but it turns out all the trial and errors and death we practiced and made to save the player character's life was actually helping the real murderer get away. The hostile environment was not a manifestation of the witch's wickedness, but Viola's desperation to save herself. To top it all up, the father who clearly loves her daughter so much would never come to the realization that he, with his own hands, killed his daughter's last hope for any chance of survival. This is the true story of the witch's house. The eversion happened under our eyes, and we did not know, and we helped the evil to get away. This sums up all the things I wanted to talk about for the witch's house. I hope you enjoyed it.